Okay. So today we are focusing on Indigenous land and analyzing maps. The idea of Indigenous land on my land of Mohegan, as well as the land around me in what we now call the state of Connecticut. I see some friendly faces in here. I will give a shout out to them in a moment. First, I want to introduce myself. I'm Director of Curriculum and Instruction at the Mohegan Tribe. I work on various projects for Mohegan with CSDE for the state of Connecticut. I'm working on the curriculum and standards documents and really advocating for our Indigenous peoples. Prior to this role, I was a fourth grade teacher. Curriculum and content was always my thing, and I am Mohegan. My department does various things. We create lessons, units of study, we connect to schools across the state. So even outside of this 1 hour PD, I can set something up to come to your schools to provide a larger PD with your staff. Okay, so this is our vision for today. I would love for you in the chat to just introduce yourself. What do you prefer to be called? What is your role in education? So that when we're working together today, I can refer to you. We are recording, so I do recognize that some cameras are off, and that's fine. So I primarily want to use the chat feature or raising your hand if you would like to participate in some of our questioning. Do keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking, and totally use those emotion icons because they're fun, okay? So right in the group chat, just add your name, what your role is in education. Have you learned with Mohegan before? And are there other Indigenous nations represented today? And we do have somebody of an Indigenous nation here today. Her name is Darlene, and she is one of my friends and colleagues, and she is wonderful to learn from also. Just a little shout out for her. Okay, I see Educational Program Director. Oh, nice. So you must work with Darlene. Oh, Gabriel, I've met you. Yes. Okay, Director of Curriculum, wonderful. Instructional Coach. Okay, thank you for adding those thoughts. Okay. Producing an education documentary on Native peoples. Wonderful. Social Studies, grade 6 and 7. Okay. So today we're going to be focusing on 6 through 12. And any questions we have along the way. We'll also have a little time at the end too for questions where we'll turn the recording off so it's a bit more of a comfortable environment. So today I want to build a comfortable learning space for you. I want to discuss Indigenous land with you. We're going to talk about analyzing boundary lines and territories of maps, significant resources of the 1600s on and off the waterways. And you'll see this right on your screen. And then I'm going to give you suggestions for compelling questions and big ideas to bring into your curriculum and to bring into your classrooms. All right, I always start my presentations off with Katatom Tamawimu to my Mohegan ancestors. I always thank my ancestors because without them, I wouldn't be able to share my heritage with you today. They have passed on all of their learning and understanding to me. I also want to give the caveat that everything I share today is information that has been passed down to me from my elders, and some of the opinions are of my own, especially as an educator. Okay, so here's our first chat. I have 2 statistics here for you, and they are from the Indigenous Futures Survey in 2020. So this survey surveyed 6,400 Native peoples, asking them about their opinions, experiences, and I took 2 of the survey results for you. So let's chat in the chat. How do one of these connect to your experience in school? So number 1 or number 2? And my bigger question is, how can we change the narrative for our students? So these are obviously problems. data that was collected. Which one of these can you connect to? If you'd like to raise your hand, you can share out loud or you can type in the chat. And I did just refresh my screen so I can actually see some of your faces now. So that's good because a moment ago it was all black screens. Okay, I see 3 of you already can relate to number 2. So people often express disappointment or anger that what they were taught was so sparse or misleading. And I can also speak to that because when I was younger, what I was taught was sparse and misleading also. Someone also said 1 and 2 as a blend. So number 1 is most Americans feel that what they learned or are teaching in schools about Native culture is inaccurate. And they strongly support the need for curriculum change. So we're now in that curriculum change. The state of Connecticut reached out to the 5 tribes of what we now call Connecticut, and we are working together to create content for you. The Connecticut State Department of Education is working to create a model curriculum for K-8, and they are working to create resources for 9 to 12. Okay, things are in the works. And I want you to focus on one of them this year. Thank you for your thought, Donna. A couple hot topics to bring up about sparse or misleading always comes back to holidays in the classroom, Columbus, Thanksgiving. A lot of misconceptions still revolve around those topics, and we need to create better narratives and provide better resources so that we can teach differently and better moving forward. Okay. These are our 5 recognized Connecticut tribes. Raise your hand if you knew the name of all of these tribes. If not, it's okay. Okay, so there are 2 federally recognized tribes, 3 state recognized tribes. We have Mashantucket Pequot, Mohegan, Eastern Pequot, Golden Hill Pagusset, and Schaghticoke. So my question for you, oh, thank you, Donna. We actually have a member of Schaghticoke in this group today, which we're super lucky. So big question, I always bring this into my presentations because if you are teaching in the classroom and if you are teaching about tribes, you need to understand what the word tribe means. So if I were to ask you what makes a group of people a tribe, there are 6 characteristics that make a tribe a tribe. What are those characteristics? You can raise your hand, speak them out, write them in the chat. There are 6. Language. Yes, some of our languages have been, and I will say stolen or taken from us, and many of them are being reclaimed right now. Yes, Donna, go ahead.
Would it be like customs or dress?
So I would say cultural or spiritual
or
traits.
religion?
And that, yeah, so
Religion?
cultural and spiritual traits. I wouldn't use the word religion, but I would use a spiritual or a belief system. Thank you.
Okay.
So that's another one. We have language, we have cultural and spiritual traits. So we have 2. We need 4 more. Relationships. So if we talk about a bloodline or a family tree, a way to connect each other. A government system. So a government or a political organization. A location. Yes, a shared location or place. Wow, you guys are really great. Not that I'm surprised. I see food on there. I would connect that with location or place or even cultural, spiritual traits. But we're missing one, and this one is often overlooked. And that's an economic system, a way of being, a way of trade, a way of survival. Okay. So of course, my next slide is your answer key, so you don't have to write anything down. Okay. After this presentation, when JHD sends me your emails, I'll send this whole slideshow to you. Okay. So here are a couple photos of the collaboration of our 5 tribes. We have all given the Connecticut State Department of Education some resources so far, and I linked the Mohegan one in here for you, and you can locate those online. We're now working on who are the Eastern Woodland peoples, what are our commonalities, and we're also going to create an introduction to educators. So you will have pedagogy, Indigenous identity, and clearing up misconceptions, and we're going to do a lot of that today. Okay, so now we're digging into the grade level specific content. So if you teach grades 6 through 8, these are some of the new standards that are in the frameworks for the model curriculum. Okay, so if we look at that first box, these are questions that I would have everybody ask themselves and everybody ask their students in their classrooms or in your museum or in your community. What are the Indigenous roots of your community? Can you research that and understand that better? Who lived here before you? Who lives here now? What happened to the peoples that were original to your land? And how can we incorporate Indigenous ways of knowing and being into our learning? So these are huge, compelling questions, right? Questions that we'll need to dive into more. For 6th grade, there are 2 standards here. Talking about boundary lines within a region. So we'll talk about tribal boundaries today. And you're going to learn with your students about political organizations that have shaped your region. Big ideas. In 7th grade, you're going to analyze cultural differences. You're going to discuss powers and responsibilities across governments. So at the Mohegan Tribe, we are a nation within a nation, and that brings in 2 government systems and a lot of overlap. So a lot of details go into that. In grade 8, students will work on individual and group perspectives of the American Revolution. And natives in the American Revolution were on both sides. Some fought within the American Revolution. Some maybe disagreed with the American Revolution. Just because you were a group of people does not believe you must act or believe one way, right? So in 8th grade, students will be unpacking marginalized voices of the American Revolution, analyzing the impact of treaties on sovereign nations, and explaining cause and effect of government policies. So many of those in the Indigenous world are the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Removal Act. Okay, so this is a sneak peek into 6 through 8 because these standards are still being fleshed out and worked on in the curriculum. Which big ideas do you want to bring into your classroom of all of these? And of course, you'll get this later. I'm giving a lot to you right now. On the next slide, these are more holistic questions for 9 through 12. They're also really big questions. 9 through 12, we're going to work on US history, world history. There may even be Native American studies courses in your high school if you're super fortunate. And some of these big compelling questions you can bring into your programming or classrooms is, how do we know what we know is true? What resources perpetuate Native stereotypes? So really hitting that, what content do you have in your classroom that promotes stereotypes? Having conversations, whether you're removing it or not. But I always suggest bringing in Native perspectives, bringing in Native voices. Okay. Always bringing Native Americans into US history. All of these are big ideas. right? Because a lot of our social studies curriculum and content is going to be inquiry based. So we want to ask these big ideas and we want students to make choice, have their voice, right? And find interest in what they're learning. Okay, I see a couple of us jotting down. But don't worry, you'll get this. And we're going to keep going because we're only here for an hour. I'm going to give you a little background knowledge and the roots of the Mohegan Tribe. Our migration story, okay? We came from the Lenni Lenape, the Delaware tribe, if you've heard of the Lenni Lenape before. The Lenni Lenape divided into 3 clans, the Turtles, the Turkeys, and the Wolves. And the Wolf clan voyaged towards New York. So the Wolf clan, the Mahikanuck, the Mohegans, traveled towards New York for better hunting, shell fishing. They heard of bountiful resources, so big water sources. Okay, and I'm skipping a lot of time because this is a very vague migration story at the moment. You can access more information later. Sachem Uncas was a Pequot over 300 years ago. He was our first Mohegan sachem, and he founded the Mohegan Nation. He chose that original Lenni Lenape Wolf Clan name of Mohegan. Mohegans resided west of the Thames River, and Pequots resided east of the river. Okay. But then there came a time where settlers and colonizers came and they wanted land, they wanted economic and political control, and many disagreements happened. Disagreements between the native peoples and the English colonists began. Okay. So leaders, chiefs, sachems had to make choices to survive. I have a couple quotes on the screen for you. Sachem Uncas had to make challenging decisions to survive. And he felt that there were too few of us in Mohegan to fight the English, so he wanted to befriend the English. He wanted to form an alliance, he wanted to form a friendship, and in his path to survival, in his path to challenges, he did so. He remained true to his Mohegan people, and we are still here today. There are a lot of challenging, complicated topics that happened within there. And I will give you resources for that on our Mohegan Educators Project to learn more about Uncas and learn more about our migration story. But this is just the vague roots into Indigenous land. So Quineticut is not named after a person. It is not a rectangle, okay? Quineticut means land of the Long Tidal River. So if somebody traveled to Quineticut, they traveled there because of that Long Tidal River, those bountiful resources. So if you're talking to your students about land, that word Quineticut is named after the river, after the resource. This is a map of Mohegan Hill. This is where the Mohegan Reservation is today. And we are right on the Thames River. And I'll show you a map in a few moments of different rivers that connect to the Long Island Sound. This is one of the tidal rivers. It's a brackish river, it's an estuary, and it was very brilliant to go to this location for food and resources. Okay. I'm going to have you read an excerpt on the screen in a moment. This is a book written by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, and it is an Indigenous people's history of the United States. So I want to give you more resources to put Indigenous people within US history, and this is a really good read. So as you read this next page, it's just an excerpt, I want you to think, how does this build on your prior understanding to teach about Indigenous land? Okay, it's a little heavy. It's page 1 in the introduction of the whole book, titled This Land. So I'm going to give you a moment to read it. Okay, so some of this already relates to a little bit of what we just talked about. And my question is, how does this build on your prior understanding to teach about Indigenous land? Was there anything that stuck with you, anything that surprised you, anything that helped you connect to the idea of an Indigenous land? You can type in the chat, you can speak out. Yes, Donna, go ahead.
We are studying national parks, and the students are learning about the Indigenous people who were there prior to the national parks and some of the benefits that they were told they would receive, which they didn't always, and their use of the land for resources and food and culture.
Yep.
So the part that resonated with me is the advanced technology making the experiences around the world more readily available. So in South America, North America, wherever it happens to be, there are Indigenous people still suffering from colonizers.
Yeah, thank you for your thinking. Would anybody else like to add? We're also going to build on to this. Okay. So we're going to look at a map. Oh, thank you, Mark. Yes. Let me go back to that. The last sentence is a good way to get kids to think about it. So Indigenous people had and have words for the land in their own languages. Yes, like Connecticut that we just talked about. Thank you. Thinking more completely. Yes, thank you, Carolyn. Have you seen this map before? I wrote some words in here for you. This map is used actually a lot in academia. There are some resources that use this map at UConn. They have a digital mashup map. It's helpful. It's a good start. It's a really good teaching point, especially in middle school and high school. So this map is a 1930s map. So it was created in the 1930s. Okay. It represents native tribe locations in 1625. I put the green X on it. That green X is there for a purpose. When I'm analyzing a map with students, I always ask myself a couple questions. Who created the map? Nice, Darlene, thanks. Who created the map? So the Connecticut Society of the Colonial Dames of America. That's what the map is telling me. Why did they create it? Who did they create it for? What did they create? What is their purpose? All of these questions, right? We're analyzing. This map was made for a reason. But my biggest question of all is what is wrong with this map? Because there's a lot wrong with this map. Who can add some thoughts for me? So remember, I put that green X there. That has a purpose. And one question will be, what is that green X? Why is it there? There aren't any straight lines in nature. You are definitely right. So we do not have boundary lines that look like boxes separating Native peoples. Tribes had agreements. Tribes did have boundaries. A lot of boundaries, though, were naturally made because of water sources, ledges, right? Natural boundaries. But there were also agreements to travel through one's land, to hunt through one's land. We did not have hard boundary lines like this. Gabriel, I see you wrote the word borders. What do you mean by borders? Do you mean those boundary lines?
Yeah, I meant that the borders are straight.
Yeah, thank you. I'm reading words on this map. Uncas, Mohegans. Well, I know that we're called the Mohegan Tribe. Pequots, Nipmucks. My family is also Nipmuc. So we're putting a lot of S's on these for plural words. I'm pretty positive that this is not how Indigenous peoples would represent their names on a map. That's a challenge to me. I do see some tribes on here. Tunxis. Some tribes on here are some of our lost tribes of Connecticut. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mark. But there's an even bigger problem when analyzing this with students. This map represents 1625. And in 1625, the colony of Connecticut, the state of Connecticut, they were not recognized yet. So this rectangle boundary line that we see of Connecticut should not even exist on this map in 1625. It also tells me that if the state of Connecticut did not exist yet, oh my goodness, look at all of these peoples that did exist on this land before we became the state of Connecticut, right? We're covered in Native nations. Our land was bountiful. So the state of Connecticut should not be represented, but obviously the Connecticut Society of the Colonial Dames of America wanted to represent that for a reason. Okay. What is the green X? Mohegan. That's exactly where I am. Yes, nice job. 2 of you answered that. So when I go to schools and I talk with teachers and I talk with students, I also put their location on the map. And that's what that Yukon digital mashup map is. It is this map in the background with a Connecticut towns map, like a current map, overlaid on top. So if a school, for example, in Farmington wanted to know what tribe or which groups of Native peoples lived on their land before them, they could see that the Tunxis was under their town, right? Kind of, except this is really old. So I'm going to give you an even better resource. But first, we're going to have a conversation. Cultural differences and encroachment. So there are differing perspectives on what land means. And we're going to talk about English colonists versus Native people, because there was a huge difference. And I'm going to bring us back to the 1600s. We can go further back than that, of what Native people constituted land, what English colonists constituted land. So the ideas of ownership, the ideas of use and access and responsibility. We had very different perspectives. First, we'll talk about Native peoples. Native peoples were stewards of the land. We took care of the land. The land provided to us, we provided to the land. We used what we took, but we thank what we took, and we gave more to the land. There are and there were beliefs in a shared spirit of all living things, spiritual and physical connections to the land. Our ancestors are buried under our land. So we stayed where our ancestors were buried to the best of our ability. Okay. Mohegan Tribe specific, I have attached for you for another time. You can dig into our creation story. And our creation story embodies Grandfather Turtle. So Grandfather Turtle is very significant, and land is very important to us. Earth started on the back of Grandfather Turtle's back. If we look at a turtle, there is so much significance behind it. I have a teaching turtle on here, a diagram with numbers on it, looking at the scutes of a turtle. My question for you being, and this amazes all children that I show, educators as well, there are 13 scutes in the middle of a turtle shell, and there are 28 scutes going around that turtle shell. How can that connect to land, life, time? Because the turtle is our timekeeper. We're putting into the land is giving back to us. But how is this turtle super significant? What do those numbers mean? There are 13 full moons in a year, yes. 13 lunar moons. And what about that 28? If we have 13 full moons in a year, there are 28 days in each moon. Okay, so this turtle, yes, nice job. Our turtle is our timekeeper. Nice, I'm seeing it in the chat now. Thank you. There's more symbolism in the Mohegan Tribe that connects Indigenous land, the importance of our moons, the importance of our ancestors, the importance of our future generations, and that's within our tribal seal. And you can read more about this on your own. You can bring this into your classrooms. Fidelia Fielding, she was once known as the last fluent speaker of the Mohegan language, though we're reclaiming it now. Her favorite saying was Mundu Wigo, and that meant the creator is good. And that is on our Mohegan flag, if you've seen it before. And in the middle of our flag, we have our symbol. And our symbol starts with that red sacred circle. Okay? Everything revolves around this sacred circle. There are 13 moons around this sacred circle. There are 4 domes. And those point in our 4 sacred directions, north, east, south, and west. They're in the shape of Grandfather Turtle. They're in the shape of our wigwams, which are our dwellings, and the dome of the sky. We have those 4 sacred trees. The 2 on the top are reaching up towards future generations, and the 2 on the bottom are always rooting down to our elders and our ancestors. Okay? So all of this together is our culture. All of it embodies land, spiritual beliefs, who we are then and who we still are today. So now, on the flip side, cultural differences and encroachment of differing perspectives of the English colonists. So the English peoples believed in individual ownership of land, not communal use of land, which Native peoples used land communally. It is now starting to become individually owned. Fences are being built to keep things in and to keep things out. Written deeds are happening with land negotiations. But what's super challenging is they're written in various languages, and those given these papers and having to sign these papers don't always understand what these papers say. So misunderstandings are happening. Land is being written away and land is being lost. Right? This is a Mohegan situation. So the agreement between Uncas and the English. Uncas and his sons at the time granted the English settlement a 9-mile square of land that they could reside on. This was in 1659. And it permitted the English to use a piece of land to establish themselves. And this is where Norwich was incorporated in 1659. So the city of Norwich, if you know where that is. It is at the very north of the Thames River. With this agreement, Uncas insisted that 16 acres abutting the Yantic Falls of this land had to be left alone because it was our Mohegan burial ground. And the colonists agreed to keep it untouched. But guess what? The burial grounds did not stay untouched. So agreements that were given with land were already broken. And what happened was broken promises. So I'm going to be giving you access to the Educators Project, And within the Educators Project, there are lessons and units of study that are created that you can dig into to learn more. One of them being, it's called Four Notable Women, and it talks about this brilliant woman named Emma Baker. I'm a descendant of Emma Baker. She did really great things. She advocated, she went to Hartford, she spoke up, she tried to make change, and she tried to change that 16 acres of land that our burial ground was sitting on. But what happened over time is it was disappearing over years, decades, and centuries because the English were encroaching. Okay, we're going to skip ahead a little bit to 1842. And this is where Emma Baker comes into play. So she was born in 1828. She was young. She and her mother were going for a walk and they witnessed this field, this burial ground field being plowed. And they witnessed burning bones and bodies. So this connects to that chapter that we read, the discussion of Indigenous land and how land has been affected, how perspectives differ, right? So this land at this point of 16 acres, only 1/8 of an acre remained. Okay. What happened to all of these ancestors buried under this land? We could infer, right? So in 1928, you see a picture at the top. That is the Masonic Temple in Norwich, and it was built right on top of the burial ground. Mohegan tried to stop the development in 1890 and in 1930, but failed. And it wasn't until 1999 that Mohegan was able to purchase our burial ground back. $1 million was paid to Masons and $1 million was paid to Norwich so that we could get this land back. And after a lot of work, the building was torn down. And you can see in the bottom picture, we restored the grounds, placing a monument there with our 4 directions and our 13 moons as a resting place for our ancestors because it was a 16-acre burial ground. Okay, there are still graves next to it today and obviously under the land, right? So throughout history, there are documents, there are dates that can show the progression of losing land, what happened, disagreements between people, getting that land back. Okay, all of that new learning. How does this connect us back to the excerpt? I know this is pretty heavy after a full work day. Yes, of course, Donna. My computer's thinking a little slow, but we'll get there. There we go. The bones of our ancestors are this land. We have a more complete narrative and a better idea of what was left out. Definitely ties into the first 2 sentences of it. I know that when I was teaching in the classroom, I had a lot of understanding, right? But I'm fortunate if I'm teaching Native American studies in the classroom because I am Native and I've had a lot of oral tradition, a lot that has been passed down to me, and I feel confident to do that. So it is my goal to take pieces of documents, create narratives, help give you resources and stories to fit these into a bigger picture in your classroom. Okay. Reading one small paragraph in an old history book does not teach us depth, right? We need more. Okay, I'm going to skip back forward because we have 14 minutes left. Good question, Mark. I do not have that for you today, but that could be something that could be created or compiled. I would suggest going to the Pequot Museum for a little more information on that, because I've been there recently and they have some really good background knowledge there for you. So Indigenous land, this is the resource I want you to use in your classroom. It is called Native Land Digital, and it is a digital map created by First Nations of Canada. And they're doing a really great job keeping it up to date, taking feedback from tribes. So if I asked you to look at this map, give this map to student learners, when discussing the land we live on today, how can this map challenge the thinking of learners? What questions will students have? How does this map change the narrative of how we were taught to think? Because I'm sharing my screen, you may not be able to see the colors as well because they are light watercolors. But I'm already noticing in the chat, the land overlaps with their boundary lines. Yes. Not hard boundaries, exactly. So if we use the first map I gave you as a teaching tool and compare it to this map, how can we analyze? What questions will students have? How on earth will students figure out where their school is on this map? They're going to have to think a different way. They may have to think through their resources, through their rivers, through the understanding of the tribes that are or were on this land. Indigenous land, thinking through an indigenous perspective. You can see how, if you see the word Mohegan on there, you can see many rivers connect to the Thames River, which shoots out into the Long Island Sound. You can go across that Long Island Sound and you can go up the Connecticut River. Ways of travel, which I'm going to give you resources for. I still have so much more in this presentation, so we may not talk about everything, but you're going to walk away with a lot of information. Okay. So resources of the land and waterways. So as I talked about the Thames River system, the Yantic, Shetucket, Quinnebog, they all lead down into the Thames River and they empty into the Long Island Sound. I have Native Indigenous name translations on here for you for words that are shared in many of our tribal sister nations. For example, the Thames River, the Massapequatuck means great river. Yantic River is the little river. Fun translations to understand the meaning of using indigenous terms to understand your land. Here's a map. I put those yellow highlighted lines on there for you. This is from 1758. And this shows you those three rivers that branch down into the Thames River and into the Long Island Sound. And boy, could you travel these rivers. And you would travel these rivers in our local nation with dugout canoes. Dugout canoes were most commonly used at Mohegan. Right? They were sturdy. They could withstand the tides and the waves of the Long Island Sound. They were built small and very large, up 40 to 60 feet long. They were hollowed out, and they were hollowed out by controlled burns and controlled fires. When a tree came down, you would keep it in the spot it was as close to the water as possible because it's heavy. And you would continue to burn out that canoe until you were ready to use it. During the winter, they were filled with water and mud and sludge and rocks to sink them to the bottom of our waterways until we were ready to resurface them again in the spring. This is a school group on the right at our Tanaquidgeon Museum watching a dugout canoe burn. And on the left, we have some Mohegan tribal members and another member of a different sister nation testing out the canoe. We have an annual canoe journey today. This is something that we continue to further connect with our ancestors. We take canoes down the Thames River. I have various paintings in here by David Wagner, and he takes Eastern woodland people, things, and creates scenes as learning moments. Okay, so this is one with a dugout canoe and a birch bark canoe in the back. Wampum. Wampum is the greatest gift, and it represents honor and promise. It comes from the Atlantic Ocean. Hopefully you've heard of wampum before. And wampum beads were created by drilling out, the white beads came from whelk shells, and the purple beads came from quahog clamshells. Okay. And in indigenous nations, wampum was used for marriages, treaties, alliances. It is a common misconception that wampum was money, that wampum was currency, but indigenous people did not have a system of currency. Have you experienced this misconception before? Wampum was used as a trade item, and the Dutch, Mark, you asked about the Dutch really wanted that wampum, and it became a very big trade item because they saw how important, how significant it was to the indigenous peoples. Okay. Here's another painting of fishing weirs. Fishing weirs would be built within the tidal rivers so that when the tide went out, it would collect the fish and the peoples would go gather. The tide was a very brilliant way to collect food and resources. Okay. There's a fun article here that you can check out, archaeological evidence of a steam pit at Trading Cove on the Thames. Trading Cove being a very important trading place for Mohegan off of the Thames River. We had many agricultural resources on the Thames River, tobacco gardens, eight-row flint cornfields, three sister gardens. Okay. I'm moving a little fast now because we're almost out of time, but you can review these on your own time. If you've heard of the three sisters before, three sisters work together and support each other. So the three sisters of corn, beans, and squash were grown together in mounds to nourish each other and provide good medicine. So the corn grows tall, the beans climb around the corn, and the squash grows under and covers the mound to protect against insects and keep in moisture. And traditional Mohegan dishes, succotash and chowders, were made of these three sisters. Never pick the first or last of any plant is a Mohegan teaching. And next steps to indigenize your classroom. So I shy away from now decolonizing your classroom because I want to give us that power. I want us to indigenize your classroom. So I challenge you to connect to the roots of your community, connect to your land, ask questions, go to your historical societies, go to Native tribes that are around your community. Practice your verb tense because Native peoples are still here today. Include Native perspective, vet your sources, and I'm going to give you resources to do that. And bring current events, bring in contemporary Native life into your spaces. I'm going to click through even though there's a little more on there. So I always challenge you to select books and other materials that are accurate and tribe specific of Native people, both past and present. So there are lists right here, blogs and websites to help you vet sources with some recommendations. Here are my recommendations for teens. It's a little pixelated on this screen, but when I send it to you, it should be clearer. I'll make sure before I send it that the images are clear. You can use this website. It's called Native Knowledge 360, and it has a great rubric to help you vet your source, to help you go through your book, to help you go through your resource. Is this a credible source? Suggested readings and resources. We talked about the first one, and then we have Ned Blackhawk here, The Rediscovery of America. We also have a book called Ancestor Approved, and it is intertribal stories for kids. A great way to bring stories from intertribal relations into your classroom. We have hands-on engagement opportunities with Mohegan. Come to our Mohegan Village, come to our Tanaquidgeon Museum, grow with Three Sisters Mound with students. Okay. Resources of the land, we're bountiful, lots of examples here. Foods of the river, bountiful. Remember I said we were brackish, so we had fresh water meeting with salt water, so a lot of different things could live within the Thames River system. Ways to connect further with Mohegan, I'm going to give you access to the Educators Project. I can come to schools for professional development. And we also have an outreach program that we can send to your school, all of this free of charge. Join us at our Wigwam Festival, our Green Corn Festival in August. Have you been to any of the Wigwam festivals or powwows of the area? I suggest participating with us because you're always welcome. You don't have to write this down or scan it because you'll have it, but here's the Educators Project with a username and password. Okay, my department manages this and we're still creating more. Oops, skip that. I'm gonna go back. Next steps, so chat with your colleagues. What interests you to teach now? What do you want to bring into your classroom? I have a Google Drive folder full of resources that I'm always adding to. That QR code will get you there, right? And then my last one is Katop Tom Tamawimu. Thank you to everybody for joining today.